Okay, good day, grade 12s. Right, an African thunderstorm. Now this is one of my favorite poems of your set works, and it's mainly because we are all very familiar with the imagery in this poem, and we've all experienced it before. So what should you know in this poem? First of all, I want you to look at the line lengths. There's lots of single word lines, and what this does is it creates tension in the reader and it speeds up the pace while you're reading it. This emphasizes the speed of the storm and the tension it creates in the people before it arrives. So the poet really works on that effect that I've been telling you all about from the beginning of the year. So be able to understand and be able to explain all the images in the poem, and there's a lot of them in this poem, and then be aware of the onomatopoeia, the alliteration, the sound effects in the poem. And then the final thing that I want you to be aware of is the change in the image of the storm in the final line. Right, so let's get to it. From the west, clouds come hurrying with the wind, turning sharply here and there, like a plague of locusts, whirling, tossing up things on its tail, like a madman chasing nothing. So the alliteration in the second line on the C, on the K and the W sound, the W sound, this emphasizes the speed of the clouds as they move quickly with the wind. If you read it out loud, you'll see that it forces you almost to speed through the line. The clouds come hurrying with the wind. And then the one-word lines of turning sharply emphasize that erratic movement of the wind, which is further emphasized by the line here and there. So those places that are almost opposites, the here, there, but the wind is in all of these places, and it's turning and it's moving and it's unpredictable. And then the simile in line 6 compares the wind to a plague of locusts. Now, a plague has very negative connotations of destruction and death. A swarm of locusts also creates massive destruction. As it passes, they eat everything in their path. So they really destroy crops, they destroy vegetation. Really nothing survives a plague of locusts, no vegetation, because they just eat up absolutely everything. So this image is effective because it emphasizes how strong and destructive the storm will be. It emphasizes to the reader that probably nothing will be left afterwards, just like if a plague of locusts passes by. Then whirling, once again, that idea of the wind is spinning, it's out of control, it's erratic, it's unpredictable. And then tossing up things on its tail, lovely alliteration there, but the wind is picking things up and then dropping them as it passes. So it looks like something that is picking things up with its tail, and then as it goes past, it just drops it again. The use of the word things is very vague, which suggests it blew a lot of objects into the air, so a lot of different things are affected by it. But this vagueness also adds to the tense tone that's created, as it creates uncertainty in the reader. And then the final line of the stanza compares the storm to a madman chasing nothing. The destruction that the storm causes is senseless and unnecessary, so it's very dangerous as well. And the comparison to a madman adds to that uncertainty that the poet is trying to create, because normally people will be uncomfortable with the idea of madness. It's not something that people are comfortable with. It should make most people on edge. Okay, pregnant clouds ride stately on its back, gathering to perch on hills like dark sinister wings. The wind whistles by and trees bend to let it pass. The clouds are compared to a pregnant woman. Please be very aware of this image and make sure that you are explaining it effectively. So it's compared to, the clouds are compared to a pregnant woman because of how full and how rounded they are. It's like they're ready to give birth, and they're obviously giving birth then to the rain that they are carrying. So it's like a pregnant woman would give birth to a baby. The clouds are going to give birth to this rain. The rain will also bring life, which is the same as introducing life when you are pregnant and you then have a baby. Right, and then in the next line, the clouds are riding on the back of the wind as if the wind were a horse. So I want you to get that idea in your head of someone who's riding on a horse. It's really quite a grand movement. It's quite sophisticated. And the word stately emphasizes that as well. It suggests grandeur, a formal, dignified movement. So this is quite different now to the way that the wind was described before. Now, these clouds are coming in a very impressive manner. They are very large. Imagine a rich person like royalty, so a king or a queen perhaps, riding on the back of a horse. And this is the image that the poet wants you to get now of these clouds that are coming towards you. They're really large and grand. Okay. So once again, it contrasts with the wild movement described in the first stanza, because as you can imagine now, this is more of a smooth movement. It's purposeful. There's a calmness to it as well. But then in the next line, the clouds are gathering. They're joining together and becoming larger as the storm approaches. So once again, even though these clouds are impressive and they are moving smoothly along, they are becoming bigger and they're becoming more dangerous looking, more ominous. And in the next line, we get that ominous feeling because they're described as dark, they're described as sinister, and these are words with very negative connotations to them, even of evil. Sorry, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The clouds are perching on hills, so as they move, it appears that they get stuck on the top of the hills for a few moments before they move on. Okay, now we're getting to what I got ahead of just now in the previous slide. So, like dark, sinister wings, the diction, dark and sinister, it implies evil intentions. So this storm is coming with that intention to destroy. And then the mention of perch and the word wings creates a comparison between the clouds and a bird. It's like it perches on the hills for briefly and then ready to fly away again. So this is what the clouds do. They sort of gather on the top of a hill. It looks like they almost get stuck, but then they move on again with the wind. They fly away again. Then the wind whistles by. That whistles suggests the strength of the wind as it makes a noise as it passes by. I'm sure you've all experienced in a very intense storm that whistling sound as the wind passes by. And the trees bend to let it pass, and trees are usually known to be very sturdy and strong. But in this case, they bend, they almost submit to this wind, which emphasizes its strength. And then stanza 3, in the village, screams of delighted children toss and turn in the din of whirling wind. So the stanza starts with a change in setting. Previously, the descriptions were of the countryside, but in this stanza now we move to the village. The children are screaming, but please take note that they are not afraid. They're not screaming because they are scared. They are described as delighted. They can feel the tension of the build-up to the storm, and they are getting very excited by it. I'm sure you've all experienced it when you were children, or you've seen it in younger kids, that build up to the storm, when it starts to get darker and the wind picks up, it creates that excitement in especially young children, and this is what's happening here. And then their screams toss and turn as the wind blows the noise around. So again, that lovely alliteration that emphasizes that movement of the wind as very erratic again. In the din of whirling wind, so the wind once again described as whirling, making reference to its chaotic, destructive movement. And then din means a constant, loud, and unpleasant sound. because this is what the wind is turning into now. It's a constant, even though it might be backwards and forwards and in all different directions, that strength of that wind is constant, and it's making that constant noise. Women, babies clinging on their backs, dart about, in and out, madly. The wind whistles by, whilst trees bend to let it pass. Please take note of the difference between the feelings of the children compared to that of the women and the babies. While the children are excited, they're playing in a carefree way, the women are darting about in preparation for the storm. So the women understand the danger which is approaching. They have probably realized that this storm is going to be destructive. They know that there's things that need to be done before the storm arrives. While the children are unaware of these dangers, they are playing and they are enjoying this build-up of excitement. And then the diction of clinging, used to describe the babies, also implies desperation. They can probably sense that stress of their mothers and their mothers' frantic movements as they rush about, and so they are clinging onto their backs. They are also not relaxed. And then take note again of the short lines to create tension in the reader, speed up the pace. It emphasizes the movement and the danger of the storm. And then the repetition of those last two lines. The wind whistles by whilst trees bend to let it pass. Notice that that is slightly longer. The pace slows down again. It's almost like a calming feeling in those two lines, but it's emphasizing that strength that the storm still has. So it's been raging, it's been carrying on, but it hasn't died down. It's still very, very strong. Clothes wave like tattered flags, flying off to expose dangling breasts. The diction of tattered gives the reader information about the context of the people described in the poem. They're not wearing stylish new clothes. Their clothes are old and worn out. The comparison to flags implies the movement of the clothes as they flap in the wind. We've all seen those old worn-out flags that look hundreds of years old, but they are still flying, even though they might be a little bit torn and faded. They are still flapping in the wind. And they fly off to expose breasts, which is a reference to the rural, traditional African setting. These people are not rich. They live a modest life in a village. They are therefore vulnerable to the destruction of the storm. And this also links to the title, as the image of people is a traditional African image. And the title is, of course, African Thunderstorm. As jagged, blinding flashes rumble, tremble, and crack. Wonderful onomatopoeia there. And the description of the lightning and thunder is extremely effective, as it brings to mind our own experiences of thunderstorms. So if you think about experiencing a thunderstorm as a child or even recently, if you see that flash of lightning, that lightning is jagged. It's almost that zigzag pattern, like we drew lightning when we were kids, when we were drawing. But it suggests that sharp zigzag pattern that the lightning often makes in the sky. The flashes are described as blinding, which tells us how bright and intense the lightning flashes are. So this is not just a little drizzle. This is a really intense, big thunderstorm. Then the onomatopoeia in the next line really emphasizes the build-up to that lightning strike, that rumble of the thunder, the tremble that thunder seems to make everything sort of vibrate, and then that crack as the lightning strikes. Amidst the smell of fired smoke and the pelting march of the storm. So there are two interpretations for the smell of smoke that's mentioned in the second last line. There could be a smell of smoke, firstly, because the lightning has hit something and set it on fire, which has caused smoke. But more likely, because we're in a rural setting, there's many uses for fire. So fires would be used for many different reasons. And there would probably be a number of fires burning at any time. The wind would cause this smoke to be blown around, which would create that smell. And then also when the rain starts and that fire starts to get damp, it creates more smoke as well, which would intensify the smell of that smoke. Then finally, the image of the storm in the final line is very important, and you must be able to explain the following. So throughout the poem, the storm is described as chaotic, destructive, and erratic. It's that chaos and it's that danger that comes with it, that unpredictability of the storm and the wind. But in the final line, it's compared to a pelting march, and the word pelting tells us that the storm is still extremely strong. It's very intense, but march suggests uniformity. If you think of soldiers marching along, everyone is exactly the same. Every movement is exactly the same. So the rain has started and the wind has probably died down, and it's now that constant downpour that comes with a thunderstorm, that extremely strong rain that is just constant, and it doesn't seem to change. It doesn't get harder and softer. It's just that constant downpour, that uniform, predictable downpour. So make sure that you can contrast those two different images of the storm. There's one that is chaotic and unpredictable, and then at the end it is constant, it's uniform, it's predictable. Right, so please do the questions in the study guide on this poem. It's 2.5.1 on page 18. Then just once again, make sure you understand the imagery and can explain it all. Make sure you can explain the difference in the image of the storm in the final line, and make sure you can identify and explain the effect of the sound devices and the figures of speech, as well as the different line lengths.